My husband's yoga instructor left a pregnancy test in our bathroom. At his promotion celebration, I gifted him baby clothes and said, "For your upcoming delivery, the divorce papers are inside." His father handed me the keys to their lake house. I found it while organizing the bathroom cabinet. A small rectangular box wedged behind Mark's shaving cream and a bottle of my prenatal vitamins. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out, the words, "Early Response Pregnancy Test," staring back at me. For a split second, impossible hope fluttered in my chest. Had I bought this during one of my desperate late-night pharmacy runs and forgotten about it? But I knew my own habits too well. I kept my tests in the basket under the sink, neatly lined up like soldiers awaiting deployment. This one was different, hidden, tucked away, and used. The protective wrapper lay crumpled inside the box, and when I tipped it over, the plastic test stick slid into my palm. 2 pink lines. Positive. If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching moment when something doesn't add up in your relationship, you're not alone. Stories like Caroline's journey from betrayal to self-discovery help us navigate our own difficult truths. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing. It's completely free and connects you with others who understand that sometimes finding your breath means first confronting what's suffocating you. Let's continue Caroline's story. I sank to the cold tile floor, the test clutched in my hand as 3 years of fertility treatments flashed through my mind. The endless hormone injections that left my stomach bruised and tender. The scheduled intimacy that transformed our bedroom from a sanctuary to a clinical staging ground. The hushed conversations with Dr. Feldman about egg quality and sperm motility, terms that had become as familiar to me as my own name. "You're still young, Caroline," he'd reassured me at our last appointment. 35 isn't old in fertility terms. We just need to find the right protocol. But Mark had been pulling away from each new treatment plan, his enthusiasm waning as our savings dwindled. "Maybe we should take a break," he'd suggested last month. "Give your body time to reset." I'd agreed reluctantly, thinking he was concerned for my well-being. Now the evidence of his true concern lay cold against my skin. When headlights swept across the bathroom window, I straightened up. Mark was home. I tucked the test into the pocket of my robe and splashed cold water on my face, studying my reflection. My eyes were too bright, my skin pale. I looked like what I was, a woman on the edge of shattering. "Caro? You home?" His voice echoed from downstairs, casual and light. As if he hadn't hidden another woman's pregnancy test in our bathroom. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself, gripping the edge of the sink. Was this actually happening? My wedding ring caught the light, the small diamond Mark had promised to upgrade when we make partner. 6 years and 2 promotions later, the same modest ring remained while he drove a new Tesla. "Upstairs," I called back, my voice impressively normal. He appeared in the doorway moments later, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, dark hair still damp from what I assumed was a post-workout shower. Always considerate, my husband never wanting to bring his sweat home to me. "You okay? You look pale." His brow furrowed with what seemed like genuine concern. I held out the test, watching his expression carefully. "I found this." His face traveled through a series of micro-expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Shock, panic, calculation, and finally, confusion. "What's this?" He took it from me, turning it over in his hands as if he'd never seen a pregnancy test before. Which was laughable, considering how many times he'd sat beside me as we waited for lines to appear. "Don't." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Just don't. Caro, I don't know what you're thinking, but it was hidden behind your shaving cream. It's positive. And it's not mine." Each word felt like glass in my throat. Mark's face settled into something approaching earnest concern. "It must be old. From when we were trying before the last treatment cycle. I keep mine in the basket. You know that. And this is recent. The expiration date on the box is next year." My voice remained steady while my world splintered around me. "Then I don't know how it got there." He shrugged, reaching to pull me into a hug that I sidestepped. "Maybe the cleaning lady has issues she's hiding from her husband? Maria is 62, Mark. And she's been widowed for 5 years. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Then I don't know what to tell you. You're clearly looking for something that isn't there." That's when I noticed it, the scent. Not his usual sandalwood cologne, but something lighter, feminine. Lavender and something citrusy. The same scent that lingered in our living room every Tuesday and Thursday after his private yoga sessions. "How's Amber doing these days?" I asked, the name falling between us like a stone. His face stilled. "What? Your yoga instructor. The one who comes to the house twice a week while I'm at work. The one whose perfume you're wearing right now." "Don't be ridiculous, Caroline." He ran a hand through his hair, his tailwind lying. "Amber is a wellness professional. She's helping me with stress management so I can be more present. For us." "For us," I repeated, a hollow laugh escaping me. "Is she pregnant, Mark? This conversation is insane." He tossed the test into the trash can. "I'm going to shower and change. We can talk when you're thinking clearly." I stood frozen as he walked past me. The bathroom suddenly felt suffocating, the walls pressing in. On autopilot, I retrieved the test from the trash, wrapped it in tissue and placed it in my jewelry box. Evidence of a crime committed against our marriage. Downstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive Cabernet we'd been saving for a special occasion. 3 years of avoiding alcohol during fertility treatment cycles had left me with a low tolerance, and the wine hit my empty stomach with alarming speed. I found myself scrolling through our shared photo album on my phone, stopping on images from our anniversary trip to Napa Valley last year. There was Mark, arm around my waist, both of us smiling against a backdrop of vineyards. Was he already seeing her then? Was I already being replaced? When he came downstairs in fresh clothes, hair still wet from his second shower of the evening, I was sitting at the kitchen island, my laptop open to Amber's Instagram page. 28 years old. Certified yoga instructor. Recent posts featuring green smoothies, challenging poses on the beach, and inspirational quotes about manifesting your true path. "What are you doing?" Mark's voice was tight. "Getting to know the woman who's apparently carrying your child." I didn't look up from the screen. "She's very bendy." "This is crazy, Caroline. I'm not having an affair with Amber. She's my yoga instructor. Who comes to our house for private sessions." I scrolled to an image of her in a sports bra, demonstrating what the caption called, "breath work for anxiety relief." "Because the studio is crowded and distracting. You're making connections that don't exist." He grabbed a beer from the fridge, his movements sharp with frustration. "I've been working 60-hour weeks to make partner. When exactly do you think I'm conducting this elaborate affair?" The question hung in the air between us. It was reasonable, logical, but the test in my jewelry box wasn't a product of my imagination. That night, Mark fell asleep almost immediately, his breathing deep and even. I lay awake beside him, thinking of the extra shower, the subtle scent of lavender, the way he'd tossed the evidence away so casually. At 2 a.m., I slipped out of bed and took my laptop to the guest room, where I spent hours researching divorce attorneys in our area. By dawn, I had a short list of names and a hollow pit in my stomach where 13 years of marriage used to be. I watched the sun rise through the guest room window, feeling the strange clarity that comes with absolute certainty. My husband was having an affair with his yoga instructor. She was pregnant. And I had decisions to make. I couldn't confront Mark with nothing but a pregnancy test and suspicions. I needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would hold up when he inevitably tried to twist the narrative. So I became a detective in my own marriage, a role I never imagined playing. 3 days after finding the test, I called in sick to work and parked my car 2 blocks from our house. From there, I watched Mark leave for what should have been the office, but instead he drove in the opposite direction. I followed at a careful distance, thanking the universe for my nondescript gray sedan against his flashy Tesla. 30 minutes later, I watched him pull into the parking lot of Westlake Women's Clinic, the same fertility center where we'd spent countless hours together. My stomach clenched as I slid lower in my seat, watching him check his phone before heading inside. 10 minutes later, Amber emerged from her white Jeep, a hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Even from a distance, I could see the smile that lit up her face when she spotted Mark waiting by the entrance. They embraced with the easy intimacy of established lovers before disappearing inside. I sat frozen in my car, knuckles white against the steering wheel. The prenatal vitamins in our bathroom suddenly made sense. Not mine at all, but kept there for her visits. How many times had she been in our home, using our shower, maybe even sleeping in our bed? Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I opened our cell phone account and clicked on Mark's detailed call history. There it was. A number called or texted almost daily, sometimes multiple times, often late at night when he claimed to be working. I saved the number, created a new contact labeled A, and continued my search. Our shared cloud storage was next. Mark had always insisted we keep our photos backed up together, in case something happens to one of our phones. Scrolling through the most recent uploads, I found nothing suspicious until I noticed a folder titled Workout Progress. Inside were dozens of photos of Amber in various yoga poses, some in what was unmistakably our living room. The most recent photo, timestamped 2 days ago, showed her seated on our couch, smiling at the camera, her hand resting on a slightly rounded belly. My hands shook as I forwarded the most damning photos to my personal email, evidence accumulating like storm clouds. The next morning I feigned sleep as Mark prepared for work. The moment his car left the driveway, I went to his home office and woke his laptop. We knew each other's passwords, or at least I thought we did. His usual combination of our wedding date and first dog's name no longer worked. 3 failed attempts later, I sat back, a bitter laugh escaping me. Another wall between us I hadn't noticed being built. But Mark had always been careless with his phone, often leaving it unattended while showering. That evening, when the bathroom door closed and the shower started, I made my move. His phone lit up with my fingerprint. He hadn't bothered to remove it from the recognized users. The text thread with Amber Wellness opened before me, thousands of messages stretching back 8 months. Can't stop thinking about this morning, a recent text from Mark read. You and our little bean are my whole world. We need to talk timing, she'd replied. I can't keep hiding this much longer and my lease is up next month. I scrolled frantically, screenshots forgotten as I absorbed their plans taking shape. What if Caroline won't agree to divorce? She will. The fertility treatments aren't working and she's too career-focused anyway. She'll be relieved. I'm scared, Em. What if you change your mind when it gets real? Never. You're my future. Both of you. The shower shut off. I quickly placed the phone back where I'd found it, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and rage. That night, I contacted Helen Sharp, the divorce attorney highest on my research list. Standard procedure, she assured me the next day in her sleek downtown office. If you suspect financial impropriety, we'll need to move quickly to document everything. The private investigator she recommended wasn't cheap, but he was thorough. Within a week, he delivered a folder containing photos of Mark and Amber at restaurants, entering a modern apartment building downtown, and shopping at high-end baby boutiques. The timeline he constructed showed their affair had begun during my second round of IVF. While I was pumping myself full of hormones and praying for our baby, Mark was creating one with someone else. But the financial evidence proved most shocking. The investigator had uncovered a separate checking account Mark had opened 6 months earlier. Regular transfers from our joint savings, labeled as investment opportunities, had built up a substantial balance. He'd also applied for a mortgage pre-approval using only his income. He's setting up a life without you, Helen stated bluntly, and using your shared assets to do it. I felt strangely calm reviewing the evidence, as if watching someone else's marriage dissolve. What's my best move now? Document everything but don't confront him yet. We want to be strategic about timing. The following weekend, while Mark was supposedly at a corporate golf retreat, I methodically photographed all our financial documents, made copies of tax returns and cataloged every asset we owned together. The woman in the mirror looked unfamiliar, determined, focused, dangerous. On Monday, Mark returned home in high spirits. Great news, Caro. The partnership committee moved up my review. The promotion announcement is this Friday at the corporate gala. That's wonderful, I replied, accepting his celebratory kiss on my cheek with a smile that felt like broken glass. What should I wear? While he showered, I quickly checked his suit jacket pockets, an invasion of privacy that no longer bothered me. Inside the inner pocket, I found a crumpled receipt from Baby Blessing's boutique for a tiny set of pajamas with Daddy's Little Co-Pilot embroidered across the front. The date showed he'd purchased them just hours earlier, probably on his way home. I carefully replaced the receipt, a strange calm settling over me. His promotion celebration would now serve a dual purpose, one he couldn't possibly anticipate. After all, what better place to expose a betrayal than in front of everyone whose opinion he valued most? I needed caffeine and solitude to plan my next steps. The morning after discovering the baby clothes receipt, I drove to Elmwood, the quaint neighborhood 20 minutes from our home where Mark would never venture. Too hipster for his corporate aesthetic. The Blue Cup was a tiny cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a vintage record shop. The kind of place that made pour-overs with excruciating precision and didn't offer syrups or whipped cream. I had just settled at a corner table with my courtier when the bell above the door chimed. Richard Wright entered, his tall frame commanding attention despite his casual demeanor. My father-in-law, unexpectedly separate from his usual country club habitat. I shrank in my seat, not ready for forced pleasantries with any member of Mark's family, but his eyes found mine immediately. Caroline. His silver eyebrows lifted in surprise. What brings you to my secret hideaway? Before I could fabricate an excuse, tears welled up without warning. I blinked rapidly, mortified at my sudden lack of composure in front of this man who had always seemed more business partner than family. Richard had maintained a polite distance since our wedding, attending holiday gatherings with appropriate gifts and inquiries about my work, but never pushing for deeper connection. He hesitated only briefly before sliding into the chair opposite mine. What's happened? Perhaps it was the gentle concern in his voice, so unlike his son's recent coldness. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion from carrying my terrible knowledge alone. Whatever the reason, the truth spilled out between stifled sobs and whispered confessions. The pregnancy test, the prenatal appointment, the text messages, the separate accounts. I expected disbelief. Defensiveness. Instead, a strange expression crossed Richard's weathered face. Recognition followed by a resigned sadness. He's his mother's son after all, he said quietly, staring into the middle distance. I had hoped, but patterns repeat, don't they? What do you mean? Richard's hands wrapped around his untouched coffee mug. Elizabeth left us when Mark was 14. Not for another man as I let everyone believe, but for her yoga instructor. A woman named Serena. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Mark never told me. No, he wouldn't have. He constructed a convenient narrative that his mother abandoned us for her career in California. Easier than facing the truth. But you never corrected it? Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. What father wants to admit he didn't see the signs? That his wife was living a double life under his roof? That he wasn't enough? I leaned forward. You knew about Mark and Amber. Suspected. Mark's been bringing her to the firm's events as his wellness consultant. The way he looks at her. He shook his head. I recognized it because I once looked at Elizabeth the same way. Why didn't you warn me? I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. Would you have believed me? Without evidence. Richard sighed. Besides, I thought, hoped, marriage to someone as grounded as you might break the cycle. That he'd make different choices than his mother. We sat in silence, two people connected by the same betrayal across generations. I felt an unexpected kinship with this man who had always seemed so remote. What will you do now? Richard finally asked. I'm meeting with my lawyer tomorrow to file for divorce. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. But first, I'm going to attend his promotion celebration on Friday. Something shifted in Richard's expression. A gleam of respect, perhaps even approval. The entire executive team will be there. Including me. I know. That's why I'm going. Richard leaned back, studying me with new interest. You're planning something. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. He doesn't get to sculpt the narrative this time. Everyone will know exactly why our marriage ended. To my surprise, Richard nodded slowly. Kenneth Davies is particularly old-fashioned about family values. As CEO, he's been championing Mark's promotion specifically because he presents the image of a devoted husband supporting his wife through fertility challenges. It's become something of a talking point among the board. I hadn't known this, that Mark had been using our painful struggle as leverage for his career advancement. The knowledge hardened my resolve. The gala is black tie, Richard continued, a tactical edge entering his voice. Kenneth's wife Janet will be seated at your table. She wields considerable influence over her husband's opinions of character. We spent the next hour strategizing, Richard offering insider information about company dynamics I would never have known. Who would support Mark unconditionally? Which board members had daughters Mark had made uncomfortable with lingering glances? Which executive assistants had complained about his demanding tone? You understand I'm helping you destroy my son's chance at partnership, Richard said as we prepared to leave. Why would you do that? He stood straighter, suddenly looking every bit the successful businessman who had built Wright Consulting from nothing. Because consequences shape character, Caroline. Mark never faced any for his mother's abandonment. I sheltered him, compensated with material things, blamed myself. Perhaps that was my first mistake. In the parking lot, Richard reached into his pocket and withdrew a set of keys. The lake house in Tahoe. It's peaceful this time of year. I stared at the keys, confused. Why would I need? You'll need somewhere to go after Friday. Somewhere Mark can't follow. I shook my head. I couldn't impose. It's not imposing when it's family. Richard pressed the keys into my palm. And you were always more of a Wright than he was, Caroline. My throat tightened at the unexpected alliance, this lifeline thrown from such an unexpected quarter. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Richard replied, his expression hardening as he glanced at his watch. We have 3 days to prepare your exit. And if I know my son, he won't make it easy once he realizes what's happening. I drove home with the lake house keys heavy in my pocket, mentally cataloging what I would need to pack secretly before Friday. For the first time since finding the pregnancy test, I felt something beyond despair. A fierce determination strengthened by knowing I wasn't standing alone. The 3 days before the gala passed in a blur of covert preparations. I had my hair done at an upscale salon, opting for a sleek chignon that elongated my neck and highlighted my cheekbones. A style Mark had always said made me look too severe. My dress, a midnight blue column with a subtle slit, had been purchased months ago for this very occasion. Now it served a different purpose entirely. Richard texted me the gala's seating chart, allowing me to mentally prepare for the evening's confrontation. I packed an overnight bag and left it in my car trunk, ready for my escape to Tahoe after the event. Helen had the divorce papers prepared, printed on premium stationery and tucked into a slim folder that fit perfectly into the gift box I'd prepared. Mark left early on Friday, needing to prepare a few things at the office before the celebration. I took my time getting ready, applying makeup with precision I normally reserved for court appearances. When I fastened my grandmother's sapphire earrings, something old, something blue, I caught myself following the bridal tradition and laughed bitterly at the irony. The Westlake Hotel's grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers and success when I arrived. I handed my wrap to the coat check and spotted Mark immediately, holding court near the bar, surrounded by admiring colleagues. He hadn't noticed me yet. Beside him stood Amber, her yoga-toned body draped in a form-fitting emerald dress that subtly accommodated her small baby bump. She was laughing at something he said, one hand resting possessively on his arm. "Champagne, ma'am." A server appeared with a tray. "No thank you. Sparkling water with lime, please." I needed absolute clarity tonight. Richard materialized at my elbow, distinguished in his tuxedo. "Caroline, you look formidable." "I feel it," I replied, accepting the water another server brought. "Is everything in place?" Kenneth's speech begins at 8, followed by the partner announcements. "You're at table 6 with Janet as promised." His eyes traveled to the gift box tucked under my arm. "Is that what I think it is?" "And more." I offered a thin smile. "Did you speak with the photographer?" "He'll be positioned to capture everything. For the company newsletter, of course." Our conspiratorial moment was interrupted by Mark's sudden appearance. His eyes widened slightly at seeing us together. "Dad. Caroline. You've found each other." He kissed my cheek, his cologne mingling with a now familiar undertone of lavender. "You're late, Caro. I was getting worried." "I wouldn't miss this for anything," I replied, my smile tight. Mark's gaze flicked to the wrapped package. "What's that?" "Your celebration gift. For later." Before he could respond, Kenneth Davies approached, his wife Janet beside him. "Mark, they're ready for us to take our seats." "Ah, and this must be Caroline. I've heard so much about your strength through these difficult times." I shook his offered hand, noting the way Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me. "That's very kind. I believe in facing difficult situations head-on." "Admirable quality," Janet commented, linking her arm with mine as we moved toward the tables. "Mark tells us you've been quite the soldier through all the fertility challenges." I let my smile falter just enough to show vulnerability. "It's been a journey with unexpected turns." At our table, I found myself seated between Janet and a senior partner's wife, with Mark directly across from me. Amber had been placed at a peripheral table with other +1s, much to her visible disappointment. Throughout dinner, I participated in conversation with practiced ease while observing Mark's frequent glances toward Amber's table. Kenneth's speech praised the firm's accomplishments over champagne and dessert. "And now, the moment we've been waiting for," he announced. "I'm pleased to welcome our newest partner, a man whose dedication to both his clients and his family values represents everything our firm stands for, Mark Wright." Applause erupted as Mark approached the podium, beaming with the confidence of a man who believed he had everything under control. I waited, the gift box heavy in my lap as he delivered his acceptance speech. "I wouldn't be here without the support of my incredible wife, Caroline," he said, raising his glass toward me. "Through personal challenges and professional demands, she's been my rock." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. I lifted my water glass in acknowledgement, locking eyes with him across the room. "And I'd also like to thank my wellness coach, Amber Jensen," Mark continued, gesturing toward her table. "Her guidance has helped me maintain balance during stressful times." On cue, Richard stood and clinked his glass. "As Mark's father and founding partner, I'd like to propose a special moment. Caroline has prepared something to mark this milestone." All eyes turned to me as I rose, gift box in hand. The walk to the podium felt endless, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Mark's smile remained fixed, though confusion flickered in his eyes. 13 years ago, I married a man I thought I knew," I began, my voice steady despite my racing pulse. "Tonight, I'm honored to present him with something that represents both our past and his future." I handed him the box, watching as he unwrapped it with growing uncertainty. His expression collapsed from confusion to horror as he lifted the tiny Daddy's Little Co-Pilot outfit, the very one from the receipt I'd found. "Congratulations are in order," I continued, addressing the now silent room. "Not just on making partner, but on Mark's upcoming delivery. A new baby and a new life." Gasps rippled through the audience. Mark's face drained of color as he discovered the divorce papers tucked into the outfit's hidden pocket. "Unfortunately, I won't be part of that delivery. But I'm sure Amber will make an excellent mother." On cue, all eyes turned to Amber, who had risen halfway from her seat, her hand protectively covering her stomach. "This is inappropriate," Mark hissed, grabbing my elbow. I pulled away, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "What's inappropriate is promising to leave your wife for months while using her fertility struggles as a sympathy card for promotion." "Mark said you knew." Amber's voice rang out suddenly. "He told me you had an arrangement, that you were staying married in name only until after his partnership came through." Kenneth Davies stood abruptly, his face thunderous. "Right, my office. First thing Monday." As security discreetly approached, several women from the executive team, including 2 senior partners I recognized from Richard's descriptions, moved to form a protective semicircle around me. "Let's get you some air," offered Diane Keller, the firm's most senior female partner, guiding me toward the exit as whispers erupted throughout the ballroom. I caught Richard's eye as we left, his slight nod confirming what we both knew. Mark's carefully constructed world had just collapsed entirely, in exactly the public manner he had always feared most. Diane Keller walked me to my car, her arms steady around my shoulders. "That was the most spectacular takedown I've ever witnessed," she said with undisguised admiration. "I've been hoping someone would expose Mark's true character for years." "Thank you for stepping in," I replied, fumbling for my keys. My hands were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "We protect our own." She handed me her business card. "Call me when you're ready to talk about returning to law. A litigator with your backbone would be an asset to our firm." I hadn't practiced law since marrying Mark and joining his company's legal department, a compromise that had gradually morphed into abandoning my career entirely. The possibility of returning to courtroom work felt like recovering a lost limb. That night, I drove straight to Tahoe, watching the city lights recede in my rearview mirror. The winding mountain roads demanded my full attention, leaving no mental space for replaying the night's events. By the time I pulled up to Richard's, my lake house, exhaustion had numbed the edges of my emotions. The cabin was larger than I remembered from our few weekend visits, its timber frame silhouetted against the starlit sky. Inside, I found fresh linens on the beds, firewood stacked neatly, and the refrigerator stocked with essentials. Richard had prepared for my arrival with characteristic thoroughness. I slept dreamlessly that first night, waking to sunlight filtering through pine trees and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. No alarms, no schedule, no performance necessary. Just me and the water and the mountains. My phone had accumulated 37 missed calls and 29 texts, most from Mark, a few from concerned friends who had heard garbled versions of the story, and one from Richard confirming he would handle the immediate fallout. I silenced all notifications except his and my lawyer's, then made coffee to enjoy on the deck. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising efficiency. Mark didn't contest the separation, perhaps understanding the optics would only worsen if he fought. His partnership offer had been rescinded, though Kenneth had stopped short of firing him outright, likely due to Richard's influence. 2 weeks into my lake house exile, Richard arrived with a folder of documents. "You might want to review these," he said, spreading them across the kitchen island. Property deeds. Transfer documents. The lake house had been moved out of the Wright family trust and into my name exclusively. "I can't accept this," I protested, staring at the paperwork. "It's too much." Richard's expression remained implacable. "Consider it compensation for time served. Mark used your shared assets to finance his affair. This merely balances the scales. It's worth millions." "Yes." He poured himself a cup of coffee, his movements unhurried. "I've had a long and prosperous career, Caroline. No one needs 3 vacation properties. Besides, you're the only one who ever appreciated this place properly." I remembered the weekends I'd spent here while Mark remained in the city for urgent work matters, now revealed as assignations with Amber. I'd kayaked alone on the lake, hiked the surrounding trails, and fallen in love with the peaceful isolation that Mark had always found boring. "Thank you," I finally said, accepting both the gift and the symbolic severance it represented from my old life. A month into my residency, a courier delivered a package from Westlake Fertility Center. Inside was a letter from Dr. Feldman expressing regret about my personal situation and offering to continue my fertility journey independently if I wished. Accompanying the letter was a catalog of donor profiles. Men whose genetic material could help create the child I'd spent years hoping for. I spread the profiles across my dining table, studying faces and backgrounds with clinical detachment. Engineer. Physician. Musician. Figure. Men willing to offer the one thing Mark had withheld. The possibility of motherhood without conditions or betrayal. For 3 days, the donor profiles remained untouched while I considered my options. On the 4th morning, I woke before dawn and paddled my kayak to the center of the still lake. As the sun crested the mountains, painting the water in gold and crimson, I realized I wasn't ready to make that decision from a place of reaction or revenge. If I chose motherhood, it would be because I genuinely wanted it for myself, not because I'd been denied it by Mark's duplicity. I returned the profiles to their folder, neither accepting nor rejecting the possibility. For now it was enough to breathe without the weight of failed expectations. Summer turned to fall, and the aspens surrounding the lake blazed in yellow splendor. I had established a comfortable routine. Morning swims, afternoon hikes, evenings spent rediscovering my passion for environmental law through remote consulting work for Diane's firm. The divorce was nearly finalized when Mark's Tesla appeared in my driveway one October afternoon. He looked diminished, his designer suit hanging loosely on his frame, dark circles shadowing his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," I said from the porch, making no move to invite him inside. "I had to see you." His voice cracked with emotion that once would have moved me. "Amber lost the baby. She's gone back to San Diego." I absorbed this information, surprised by the absence of satisfaction I felt at his misfortune. "I'm sorry for your loss. I made a terrible mistake, Caroline. I see that now." He took a tentative step forward. "We could try again. Start fresh. There is no we anymore, Mark. We've been through so much together. 13 years. That has to count for something." Desperation etched his voice. "I still love you." I studied him, this man I had once built my world around. I could see the calculation behind his remorse, the convenient timing of his return now that his other option had evaporated. Once I might have mistaken it for genuine contrition. "Go home, Mark. Your father is expecting you for dinner." "Hi, Father." He laughed bitterly. "He hasn't spoken to me since the gala. He's taking your side in all this. There are no sides anymore. Just consequences." I watched him drive away, waiting for the familiar ache of loss that never materialized. Instead, I felt only a profound sense of closure. That evening, I walked to the end of my dock as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The lake stretched before me, its surface painted in amber and rose. Birds called to one another across the water, their voices clear in the crisp autumn air. I filled my lungs with the scent of pine and wood smoke, breathing deeply without the constriction of doubt or inadequacy that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing its presence. For the first time in years, my breath came easily, unhindered by the weight of someone else's betrayal. Standing alone at the edge of the water, I realized I no longer felt incomplete or insufficient. The future stretched before me, undefined, unplanned, and entirely my own. I exhaled slowly, watching my breath form a cloud in the cooling air. Then I turned toward the warm light of my home, taking one step, then another into whatever came next. On my first day at my dream job, I discovered that my new boss was my ex. The one who once said, "You'll never be successful without me." He smiled, thinking he still had power over me. But when I revealed my true position in the company, he turned pale because the security guard handed me my temporary badge and I suppressed a smile at the irony. "Junior executive," it read, though the contract I'd signed last week said Chief Operations Officer. As I stepped into the elevator of Blackwood Industries, my heart raced, not from nervousness but anticipation. 3 years ago, Joseph had laughed when I told him my career ambitions, telling me I'd never succeed without his help. Now he was about to discover just how wrong he'd been. The board's announcement of my true position was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Joseph's face would be worth every second of the wait. Before we dive into Lauren's journey from a dismissed analyst to Blackwood Industries' revolutionary leader, hit subscribe to join our community. Together, let's explore more stories where success becomes the sweetest revenge. Now let's begin. The elevator's polished brass doors reflected a composed woman in a carefully chosen navy suit, modest enough for a junior executive, yet sophisticated enough for a COO. My fingers traced the edge of my temporary badge as memories flooded back. Joseph's mocking laughter still echoed in my mind, but today it fueled rather than haunted me. 47th floor, the elevator chimed pleasantly. I stepped out into the familiar corridor I'd memorized from the building plans. Various employees hurried past, some throwing curious glances my way. They'd been buzzing about the mysterious new COO for weeks, though only the board knew her identity. I caught fragments of their whispered conversations. "Did you hear about the board meeting? Something big's happening at 10. Joseph's been on edge all morning." Perfect. The rumors were already circulating, creating exactly the atmosphere I'd anticipated. I made my way to the junior executive's open office area, where a modest desk awaited me. It was strategically positioned with a clear view of Joseph's corner office, a vantage point I'd specifically requested during my secret meetings with the board. Setting down my briefcase, I pulled out a simple notebook and pen, playing the part of the eager new hire. Through the glass walls, I could see various department heads gathering for their morning meeting. Joseph stood among them, commanding attention with his characteristic arrogance. He hadn't changed a bit. Same expensive suit, same dismissive gestures, same way of talking over others. My phone buzzed quietly, a message from the board chairman. "Everything's set for 10 a.m. The conference room is prepared." I smiled, remembering the chairman's expression when I'd presented my 3-year track record. The acquisitions I'd led, the failing companies I'd turned around, the innovations I'd implemented, all accomplished without Joseph's help. The board had been impressed not just by my achievements, but by my proposal to revolutionize Blackwood's operations. Joseph's outdated management style was costing them millions, though he'd managed to hide it through creative accounting. A flutter of movement caught my eye. The morning meeting was ending and executives were filing out of the conference room. Joseph emerged last, his attention fixed on his phone. I lowered my head, pretending to study my notebook, but I could feel the moment his gaze landed on me. Well, his voice carried that familiar condescending tone. Lauren Mitchell?" I looked up, feigning surprise. "Joseph. I didn't expect." "It's Mr. Sterling here," he interrupted, that smug smile spreading across his face. What a surprise. Junior executive? Well, I suppose everyone has to start somewhere. The nearby employees pretended not to listen, but their typing had suspiciously slowed. I smiled politely, letting him savor what he thought was his moment of triumph. The antique clock on the wall showed 9:15 a.m. In exactly 45 minutes, everything would change. I hope you're ready to work hard, Joseph continued. Things are different here than at your previous positions. He emphasized the last word, clearly referring to the small startup where we'd first met, the one he'd tried to sink after our breakup. I'm always ready to work hard, I replied, the double meaning clear only to me. In fact, I'm looking forward to today's board meeting. I hear there are some interesting announcements planned. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Good. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The morning was young and my temporary badge felt lighter with each passing minute. By lunch, everyone would know exactly who Lauren Mitchell was, and Joseph Sterling would learn that success is the best revenge served cold. Joseph lingered by my desk, his presence casting a shadow over my carefully arranged workspace. The tension in the air was palpable as other employees stole furtive glances our way. His expensive cologne, still the same brand from 3 years ago, brought back a flood of memories I'd rather forget. So Lauren, he drawled, perching himself on the edge of my desk uninvited. Let me guess. You finally realized the corporate world isn't as simple as you thought? His wedding ring caught the fluorescent light as he gestured dismissively. A new addition, I noted with detached interest. I maintained my composure, arranging my expression into one of polite attention. Actually, I found it quite fascinating. The dynamics of leadership, strategic planning, corporate restructuring. I let the words hang in the air, watching his reaction. A slight frown creased his brow. These weren't the terms a junior executive typically threw around so casually. Good. Let him wonder. Well, he straightened his tie, a nervous habit I remembered well. As your direct supervisor, I'll be overseeing all your work. We have very high standards here at Blackwood. His emphasis on direct supervisor almost made me laugh out loud. The antique clock now showed 9:30 a.m. 30 minutes until the board meeting that would change everything. I could already see several board members arriving through the glass doors of the executive floor, their expressions carefully neutral as they passed us. Of course, I replied, shuffling some papers on my desk. I'm looking forward to learning from everyone here. The double meaning in my words was lost on him, but I noticed Janet from HR hiding a smile behind her coffee mug. She'd been instrumental in processing my real appointment papers. Joseph's phone buzzed. Probably the meeting reminder. Right then. First task. I need the quarterly reports from last year summarized by lunch. He smirked, clearly expecting this to overwhelm me. All 6 departments with trend analysis. The ones showing the 17% decline in innovation investment while reporting a falsified 12% increase to the board? I kept my voice low, innocent. He froze mid-turn, his back stiffening. Excuse me. Oh, just something I noticed in my preparation for the role. I smiled blandly. I'm very thorough with my research, Joseph. Always have been. The color drained slightly from his face as he leaned closer, dropping his voice to a whisper. Listen here, Lauren. Whatever game you think you're playing. Mr. Sterling, his secretary called out, interrupting our tete-a-tete. The board members are requesting your presence in the conference room. Something about reviewing some documents before the main meeting? I stood, gathering my notebook and phone. We should both head there, actually. Wouldn't want to keep them waiting. You weren't invited, he snapped, his composure cracking slightly. Weren't you informed? I raised an eyebrow. All department heads and new executives are required to attend. The emphasis was subtle but effective. Joseph's face flickered between confusion and growing unease as he noticed several senior managers nodding respectfully in my direction as they passed. The dynamic was shifting, though he couldn't quite grasp how or why. We walked toward the conference room, his stride becoming less confident with each step. Through the glass walls, I could see the board members arranging papers. My proposal for company restructuring prominently placed at the center of the table. After you, Mr. Sterling, I gestured to the door, my voice carrying a hint of authority that made him pause. I believe this meeting will be quite enlightening for everyone involved. The uncertainty in his eyes as he pushed open the door was just the beginning. In 15 minutes, the carefully constructed world where Joseph Sterling held all the power would come crashing down. And I would be there watching as he realized that the junior executive he'd dismissed so readily was about to become his worst nightmare. As we settled into the conference room, my mind drifted back to that pivotal day 3 years ago. The memory was crystal clear. Joseph's corner office at our previous company, Starling Technologies, where everything had fallen apart. "You're being unrealistic, Lauren," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair with that insufferable air of superiority. "A management position? You barely understand how this industry works." His words had cut deep, especially coming from someone I'd trusted both professionally and personally. I'd stood there, clutching my proposal for a new digital transformation strategy. A project I'd spent months developing. "The numbers speak for themselves, Joseph. This could revolutionize how we—" "The numbers." He'd laughed, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "You're an entry-level analyst who got lucky with a few spreadsheets. Know your place." That meeting hadn't just been about a rejected proposal. It had been the culmination of months of subtle undermining, of Joseph taking credit for my ideas while simultaneously dismissing my capabilities in front of others. Our personal relationship had already been strained by his controlling nature, but this was different. This was calculated professional sabotage. The present-day conference room started filling with board members, pulling me from my memories. Joseph sat across from me, still projecting confidence, though I noticed his fingers drumming nervously on the polished table. My mind flashed back to the aftermath of that devastating day. I'd left Starling Technologies with nothing but a cardboard box of personal items and a shattered sense of self-worth. Joseph's parting words had followed me down the elevator. "You'll never succeed without me. You're not cut out for this world." That night, sitting in my small apartment surrounded by job rejection emails, all influenced by Joseph's quiet words to his industry contacts, I'd hit rock bottom. But something unexpected happened in that moment of despair. A calm clarity had washed over me as I'd opened my laptop and begun to plan. First came the small consulting firm I started, taking on projects nobody else wanted. 18-hour days, endless networking, and a laser focus on results. Each small success built upon the last. Within a year, I'd turned around 3 failing companies, earning a reputation as someone who could make the impossible possible. The chairman's voice brought me back to the present. "Before we begin, I believe we have some introductions to make." Joseph was watching me now, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. He still didn't understand, but he was beginning to sense something wasn't right. "Good." I remembered the day I'd first met with Blackwood's board. They'd been impressed not just by my track record, but by my detailed analysis of their company's weaknesses, many stemming from Joseph's outdated and toxic leadership style. His creative accounting had hidden the true impact, but the numbers didn't lie. Not to someone who'd learned to read between the lines. "Ms. Mitchell," the chairman continued, "would you like to properly introduce yourself to the team?" 3 years of careful planning, of strategic moves and calculated risks, had led to this moment. I stood slowly, smoothing my suit jacket with steady hands. The fear that had once paralyzed me in Joseph's presence was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence earned through countless battles and victories. "Thank you, Chairman Edwards," I smiled, watching Joseph's face as realization began to dawn. "For those who don't know me, I'm Lauren Mitchell, your new Chief Operations Officer. And I believe we have some serious changes to discuss." The sharp intake of breath from Joseph's direction was barely audible, but to me, it was sweeter than any symphony. The ghosts of the past were about to meet the reality of the present, and I was finally holding all the cards. The boardroom fell silent as I remained standing, commanding the space that had been preparation years in the making. Chairman Edwards nodded approvingly as I opened my leather portfolio, revealing the comprehensive strategy document that had sealed my position. 2 months ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. I presented this board with evidence of systematic mismanagement and outdated practices that have cost Blackwood Industries approximately $48 million in lost opportunities over the past fiscal year alone. Joseph's face contorted, a mix of disbelief and growing horror. His eyes darted to the chairman, seeking an ally but found none. This wasn't a sudden coup. It had been meticulously orchestrated through dozens of private meetings and careful relationship building. I clicked a remote, bringing up the first slide of my presentation. These graphs represent employee turnover rates under current management. My gaze swept the room, deliberately avoiding Joseph. Particularly interesting is the pattern in the innovation department. The room tensed as Sarah Martinez, head of HR, leaned forward. She'd been instrumental in providing the data that helped build my case. 78% of exit interviews cited toxic leadership as the primary reason for departure, she added, her voice firm. The cost of recruiting and training replacements has been substantial. That's absurd, Joseph interjected, his composure cracking. Those numbers are verified by 3 independent auditors, I cut in smoothly. The same auditors who helped uncover the discrepancies in your quarterly reports, Joseph. The memory of my first secret meeting with the board flooded back. It had been a rainy Tuesday evening 2 months ago. I'd walked in with 5 years' worth of research, analysis, and a network of former employees willing to testify about Joseph's leadership style. The board's skepticism had melted as I methodically presented evidence of systematic issues and, more importantly, solutions. Ms. Mitchell's track record speaks for itself. Chairman Edwards spoke up, his authoritative voice filling the room. Her turnaround of Jensen Corp last year caught our attention, but it was her intimate understanding of our company's challenges that convinced us she was the right choice for COO. I clicked to the next slide, revealing a comprehensive restructuring plan. My first 90 days will focus on 3 key areas: organizational culture, operational efficiency, and innovation revival. We're not just changing leadership. We're transforming how Blackwood Industries does business. The board members nodded in approval. They'd already seen and endorsed this plan. Only Joseph sat frozen, watching his carefully constructed kingdom crumble. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that even his most loyal supporters were avoiding eye contact. I've already spoken with most of the department heads, I continued, acknowledging the senior managers around the table. Their insights have been invaluable in refining this strategy. That revelation seemed to hit Joseph hardest. The realization that his own team had been part of this transformation, meeting with me in secret over the past weeks. His fingers gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white with tension. The board has unanimously approved these changes, Chairman Edwards concluded, his tone leaving no room for debate. Ms. Mitchell has our complete confidence. I closed my portfolio, finally meeting Joseph's gaze directly. The man who had once dismissed my potential now sat before me, comprehending the full scope of my ascent. Every connection I'd built, every late night analyzing reports, every strategic move had led to this moment. Thank you, Chairman Edwards, I said, maintaining perfect professional composure. I believe it's time we discuss the new departmental structure and reporting lines. Joseph, you'll find your revised role outlined in the documents being distributed now. The assistant began passing out folders, and I watched as Joseph's hands trembled slightly while opening his. The morning was far from over, and his world would continue to shift with each passing minute. As the morning progressed, I settled into my temporary desk one last time, observing the ripple effects of the board meeting. Through the glass walls, I could see Joseph pacing in his office, soon to be my office, while making frantic phone calls. His secretary, Amanda, was already updating the nameplate on the door, her efficient movements a stark contrast to his obvious distress. The office buzz had transformed into a symphony of whispers and speculation. Every few minutes, someone would walk past my desk, stealing glances with newfound respect and curiosity. The story was spreading rapidly through the building's 47 floors, carried by hushed conversations and urgent text messages. Did you see his face when she revealed the audit results? I overheard Mark from accounting whisper to his colleague. 3 years of manipulated reports, exposed in 15 minutes. Sarah Martinez stopped by my desk, a subtle smile playing on her lips. The HR team is already preparing the announcement email, she murmured. Though I doubt there's anyone left who hasn't heard something by now. I nodded, maintaining my professional demeanor while watching Joseph through the glass. He'd stopped pacing and now sat slumped in his chair, staring at the revised organizational chart I'd presented. His entire world had shifted in the span of a morning, and the aftershocks were still rolling through the building. Lauren? A tentative voice interrupted my thoughts. It was David Chin, one of the junior analysts who'd suffered under Joseph's leadership. I just wanted to say, The innovations proposal you mentioned in the meeting? The one about cross-departmental collaboration? Some of us have been trying to suggest something similar for months. But Joseph shut it down. I finished for him, remembering my own similar experiences. I'd love to hear your ideas, David. Schedule some time with Amanda for this afternoon. His face lit up. The first of many changes I plan to implement. As he walked away, I caught Joseph watching our interaction, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. He'd spent years creating an environment of fear and competition, and here I was, dismantling it within hours of taking power. The clock ticked toward the company-wide announcement scheduled for 2 p.m. I'd chosen the timing deliberately, late enough for the informal news to spread, creating anticipation, but early enough to address concerns and set the tone for the future. My phone buzzed with messages from other executives I'd networked with during my ascent. Heard the news. Brilliantly executed. 3 years in the making. Worth every minute. Joseph finally got what was coming to him. I silenced the notifications, focusing instead on the task ahead. The company-wide email was drafted, reviewed, and ready to send. The all-hands meeting was scheduled. Security had been quietly briefed about potential reactions, though I doubted Joseph would cause a scene. His pride, if nothing else, would keep him in check. Ms. Mitchell? Amanda appeared at my desk. Your new office is ready, and the IT team has transferred all systems access. Would you like to move in now or after the announcement? I glanced at Joseph, still sitting in what was now my office. After, I replied. Let's do this by the book. The next hour crawled by, filled with meaningful glances and barely concealed anticipation. I used the time to observe, noting who seemed relieved by the change and who appeared uncertain. Every reaction, every whispered conversation provided valuable information for the transitions ahead. At 1:55 p.m. I stood straightening my suit jacket. The temporary badge that had served its purpose now felt like a relic from another era. In 5 minutes, the official announcement would go out and there would be no more need for pretense. The power play I'd orchestrated was complete, but the real work, transforming Blackwood Industries into what it could be, was just beginning. Joseph's eyes met mine through the glass one last time, and I saw in them the dawning realization that this was more than revenge. This was revolution. At precisely 2 p.m., the company-wide email landed in every inbox at Blackwood Industries. The subtle symphony of notification sounds echoed through the office, followed by a collective intake of breath. I stood in the conference room doorway watching the drama unfold on the floor. Effective immediately, Lauren Mitchell will assume the position of Chief Operations Officer. The words appeared on hundreds of screens simultaneously, and the atmosphere crackled with electric tension. Through the glass walls, I could see employees nudging each other, pointing at their monitors, then casting furtive glances in my direction. The temporary badge around my neck now seemed almost comical. Joseph burst out of his office, tablet in hand, his face a shade of red I'd never seen before. This is ridiculous. His voice carried across the suddenly silent floor. There must be some mistake. I've been running these departments for 5 years. Chairman Edwards stepped out of the elevator at that precise moment, his timing impeccable as always. No mistake, Joseph. The board's decision is unanimous and final. His authoritative tone cut through the tension like a knife. Ms. Mitchell, shall we proceed with the all-hands meeting? I nodded, my heels clicking purposefully across the marble floor as I made my way to the main conference room. Employees were already filing in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. The room, designed to hold 200, quickly filled to capacity with more watching through the glass walls. Good afternoon, I began, my voice steady and clear. As you've just read, some significant changes are taking place at Blackwood Industries. Changes that are long overdue. Joseph stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his attempt at defiance undermined by his visible discomfort. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he calculated his options. All of them exhausted before they began. Over the next few weeks, we'll be implementing a comprehensive restructuring plan. I continued, clicking through my presentation. Our focus will be on innovation, collaboration, and creating an environment where every voice matters. The energy in the room shifted as I outlined specific changes. Merit-based promotions, transparent communication channels, increased investment in employee development. With each point I could see hope kindling in eyes that had grown dull under Joseph's leadership. But what about existing projects? A brave voice called out from the middle of the room. All heads turned to Sarah from product development. The ones Mr. Sterling has been overseeing? I smiled, pulling up the next slide. Excellent question. I've reviewed all current projects personally. My gaze met Joseph's. Those with merit will continue with enhanced resources. Others will be re-evaluated based on actual market potential rather than personal preferences. The implied criticism wasn't lost on anyone. Joseph's pet projects, which had drained resources while more promising initiatives withered, were about to face real scrutiny. This is corporate suicide, Joseph suddenly interjected, stepping forward. The board can't possibly. The board has reviewed Ms. Mitchell's track record extensively, Chairman Edwards cut in smoothly. Her success in turning around Jensen Corp and revolutionizing Meridian Systems speaks for itself. Numbers don't lie, Joseph. You taught me that yourself. The irony of using his own words against him wasn't lost on the room. A few muffled chuckles echoed from the back. I maintained my professional composure, though inside I savored every moment. Change can be uncomfortable, I acknowledged, addressing the room at large. But it can also be incredibly rewarding. My door will always be open to those with ideas, concerns, or suggestions. As the meeting concluded, employees filed out with a new energy in their steps. Joseph remained rooted in place, watching his empire crumble around him. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably and everyone knew it. Amanda approached with my new office keys and updated security credentials. Your office is ready, Ms. Mitchell, she announced, loud enough for Joseph to hear. Would you like me to have Mr. Sterling's personal items packed up? I met Joseph's gaze one final time. Yes, Amanda. It's time for a fresh start. The transformation was immediate and electric. As I settled into my new office, the same one where Joseph had once lorded over his domain, the energy throughout Blackwood Industries pulsed with newfound vitality. The heavy mahogany furniture that had dominated the space was already being replaced with modern, collaborative pieces. Light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, no longer blocked by the imposing filing cabinets Joseph had used to create barriers. Ms. Mitchell? Amanda appeared at my door, tablet in hand. We've had 17 department heads request meetings for today alone. And the innovation team has already submitted 3 proposals that were previously discouraged. I smiled, noting the diplomatic choice of words. Schedule them all, Amanda. Priority to the innovation team. I want to see those proposals within the hour. The news of Joseph's demotion spread through the building like wildfire. From my vantage point, I watched him clear out his office, his movements stiff with barely contained rage. Security stood discreetly nearby, a precaution I'd insisted on, knowing his tendency for dramatic outbursts. You can't just erase 5 years of leadership. He spat as he passed my door, carrying a box of personal items. No, I agreed, not looking up from my computer. But we can learn from them. Your revised role in project assessment awaits you on the 3rd floor, Joseph. I trust you'll find it educational. His face contorted, but before he could respond, Sarah Martinez appeared with a stack of HR files. Lauren, you need to see these. We've found some concerning patterns in the performance reviews. The afternoon unfolded in a blur of revelations. Employees who'd been silenced under Joseph's regime stepped forward with innovations and improvements they'd kept hidden. Teams that had been artificially separated began collaborating, their combined expertise sparking solutions to long-standing problems. The energy is completely different, David Chin remarked during our scheduled meeting. It's like everyone's finally breathing again. By late afternoon, the physical transformation of the executive floor was complete. Gone were the intimidating barriers and closed doors of Joseph's era. In their place, glass partitions and open workspaces invited collaboration. The message was clear. Transparency would be the new normal. Ms. Mitchell? A nervous voice caught my attention. Rebecca from accounting stood in my doorway, clutching a folder. There's something you should see about the financial reports from last quarter. I gestured for her to enter, noting how she'd never dared approach Joseph's office before. Show me everything, Rebecca. No detail is too small. As she spread the documents across my desk, patterns emerged, subtle discrepancies that Joseph had used to maintain his facade of success. Each revelation confirmed the board's decision to bring me in. "They're already calling it the Mitchell Revolution downstairs," Amanda reported, bringing in my evening coffee. "The maintenance team says they've never seen so many people staying late voluntarily. They're actually excited about work." I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of amber and gold. In just one day, the atmosphere had shifted from fear to possibility. Teams that had once competed now collaborated. Ideas flowed freely where silence had reigned. "Lauren," Chairman Edwards appeared in my doorway. "The board would like your assessment of today's developments." I turned, taking in the transformed office space behind him. "Tell them to watch our productivity metrics over the next week. Actions speak louder than words." As the evening settled in, I received one final email from Joseph's wife. "I always knew he was lying about you," she wrote. "Congratulations on the position. Use it better than he did." I closed my laptop, savoring the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. The revenge I'd planned for 3 years had transformed into something far more meaningful. A revolution in corporate culture. And this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate how far I'd come from that devastating day in Joseph's old office. Success indeed was the sweetest revenge. 1 month into my tenure as COO, Blackwood Industries had undergone a metamorphosis that even the most optimistic board members hadn't anticipated. The quarterly reports told a story of unprecedented growth. Productivity up 40%, employee satisfaction scores reaching record highs, and 3 major innovations fast-tracked for patent submission. The most visible change was Joseph's adaptation, or lack thereof, to his new role in project assessment. From my office, I could see him trudging to his cubicle each morning, his designer suits gradually replaced by business casual attire. The man who once commanded an entire floor now shared space with entry-level analysts, experiencing firsthand the environment he'd created. The third-floor team actually submitted a formal complaint, Amanda reported one morning, trying to suppress a smile. "Apparently, Joseph's having trouble with the collaborative workflow system we implemented. Schedule him for the next training session," I replied, reviewing the latest innovation proposals. "The same one all new employees attend. He could use a refresher on teamwork." The irony wasn't lost on anyone when Joseph found himself sitting through workshops on effective communication and emotional intelligence. His attempts to maintain his former authoritarian style fell flat in an environment that now valued collaboration over intimidation. "Ms. Mitchell?" David Chin appeared at my door, practically bouncing with excitement. "The cross-departmental initiative you approved? We've already identified potential savings of $12 million annually." I gestured for him to elaborate, noting how confidently he now presented his ideas. The same young man who'd once feared speaking up in meetings was becoming a rising star under the new management structure. "It's not just about the money," he continued, spreading charts across my desk. "By breaking down the silos Joseph created, we're seeing innovations we never thought possible. Marketing is talking to R&D, finance is collaborating with product development." A knock interrupted us. Sarah Martinez entered with the latest HR metrics. "Employee turnover has dropped to 5%, she announced. "And applications for internal positions have tripled. People actually want to stay and grow with the company now." The transformation extended beyond numbers. The office atmosphere had shifted from cutthroat competition to collaborative energy. The once sterile corridors now buzzed with impromptu brainstorming sessions. Meeting rooms, previously reserved for Joseph's intimidation sessions, hosted cross-functional teams working on breakthrough projects. "Lauren," Chairman Edwards called from my doorway. "Got a minute to discuss something interesting?" He settled into the visitor's chair, looking amused. "Joseph submitted a proposal through the new anonymous suggestion system. Actually has some merit, though I suspect it killed him not to put his name on it." I raised an eyebrow, accepting the document. "How times change." "Speaking of change," Edwards continued, "the board is thrilled. Your approach has exceeded all expectations. Though I must ask, was revenge everything you hoped for?" I glanced through the glass walls at the vibrant office beyond. Teams collaborated in open spaces, ideas flowed freely, and even Joseph, despite himself, was beginning to contribute meaningfully from his new position. "This stopped being about revenge weeks ago," I replied thoughtfully. It's about creating something better than what he destroyed. As if on cue, Joseph passed by with his project team, actually engaged in what appeared to be a productive discussion. He caught my eye briefly, and for the first time I saw something different in his expression. Not anger or resentment, but perhaps a grudging recognition. The quarterly shareholders' meeting is next week, Edwards reminded me. They're eager to hear about the Mitchell method firsthand. I smiled, remembering Joseph's words from 3 years ago. You'll never be successful without me. He'd been right in a way. His cruelty had driven me to revolutionize not just my career, but an entire corporate culture. Success isn't about power over others, I told Edwards, watching the sunset paint the city skyline. It's about empowering everyone to succeed. That's the real revolution. The chairman nodded approvingly as he stood to leave. Well, here's to the new order at Blackwood Industries. You've turned revenge into renaissance. 3 months into my leadership at Blackwood Industries, I sat in my office late one evening, reviewing Joseph's latest project assessment report. To my surprise, his analysis was thorough, insightful, and devoid of the arrogant undertones that had once characterized his work. Ms. Mitchell? Amanda's voice interrupted my thoughts. Joseph's requesting a meeting. He says it's important. I hesitated, memories of our past flooding back. Schedule him for tomorrow morning, first thing. The night grew deeper as I contemplated this development. The quarterly numbers were better than ever. Employee satisfaction at 92%, innovation submissions up 215%, and stock prices reaching historic highs. Yet something felt unfinished. The next morning, Joseph entered my office precisely at 8 a.m. Gone was the swagger that had once defined him. In its place, a measured professionalism I'd never seen before. Lauren, he began, then corrected himself. Ms. Mitchell. I've been working on something I think you should see. He placed a folder on my desk, a comprehensive analysis of our new collaborative system's impact, complete with suggestions for further improvements. The work was exemplary, showing a depth of understanding that revealed how much he'd learned from his new position. 3 months ago, he said quietly, I would have claimed credit for this team's work. But they taught me something about real leadership. I studied him carefully, searching for any trace of manipulation. Instead, I found something unexpected, genuine humility. Your anonymous suggestions through the system haven't gone unnoticed, I replied. They've actually helped several departments streamline their processes. He nodded, a flash of pride crossing his face before being replaced by something deeper, regret. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just about you, but about everything. The way I led, the way I treated people. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Watching you transform this company, seeing what real leadership looks like, it's been the most humbling experience of my life. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken words. 3 years of plotting revenge had led to this moment, but the satisfaction I'd expected to feel was replaced by something else entirely. The team speaks highly of your recent contributions, I offered. Particularly your mentoring of new analysts. A slight smile touched his lips. Ironic, isn't it? I'm finally becoming the leader I always claimed to be, but only after losing everything I thought made me powerful. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the changed office landscape beyond, a physical testament to how far we'd come. Joseph, I said carefully, there's a new position opening up. Deputy Head of Innovation Assessment. The role requires someone who understands both the old and new Blackwood, someone who's experienced transformation firsthand. His eyes widened slightly, understanding the olive branch being extended. Why would you give me that opportunity? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. After everything? I stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Because revenge wasn't the victory I thought it would be. Real success is about lifting people up, not tearing them down. Even those who once tried to destroy us. I don't deserve it, he said quietly. Maybe not, I agreed. But that's not why I'm offering. The company needs someone who understands both failure and growth. Your journey from tyrant to team player. That's valuable experience. He stood silently for a moment, processing my words. I'd like to earn it properly this time, he finally said. Start from the bottom of the department, prove my worth. I nodded, feeling the last remnants of old resentments dissolving. That can be arranged. As Joseph left my office, I realized that the true victory wasn't in destroying him, but in being part of his redemption. The revenge I'd plotted had transformed into something far more powerful. A lesson in genuine leadership and growth. The woman who had entered Blackwood Industries seeking revenge was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true power lies not in dominance, but in the ability to transform both ourselves and others. 1 year later, I stood at the podium during Blackwood Industries' annual shareholders meeting, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The company had not just survived its transformation. It had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. Under the new management structure, I announced to the packed auditorium, Blackwood Industries has seen a 200% increase in innovation patents, a 150% rise in employee retention, and our stock value has tripled. From my position on stage, I could see Joseph sitting in the middle rows, nodding along with the statistics. He'd earned his way up to senior innovation strategist, proving himself through merit rather than manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. But numbers tell only part of our story, I continued. The real success lies in the culture we've built together. A culture where every voice matters, where innovation isn't just encouraged, it's expected. After the presentation during the reception, I found myself standing next to Joseph at the refreshment table. The awkwardness that had once characterized our interactions had evolved into a professional respect neither of us had anticipated. "Quite a year," he remarked, sipping his sparkling water. "You know, I found my old performance reviews from when we worked together at Starling Technologies." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "Reading them now, I can't believe how blind I was," he continued. "All those ideas I dismissed. They were exactly what Blackwood needed. My biggest failure wasn't losing my position. It was not recognizing true talent when it was right in front of me." Before I could respond, David Chin approached with excitement radiating from his face. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Sterling, the Singapore office just approved our joint innovation proposal. They're implementing it next quarter." I watched as Joseph engaged with David, offering genuine congratulations and thoughtful suggestions for the implementation phase. The transformation in both men was remarkable. One had risen from fearful junior analyst to confident leader, while the other had journeyed from tyrannical boss to respected mentor. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Chairman Edwards joined me on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "When we hired you," he mused, "we expected a turnaround. What you've given us is a revolution in corporate culture that's becoming a case study at business schools." I smiled, remembering the frightened analyst I'd once been, standing in Joseph's office as he crushed my dreams. Sometimes the best revolutions aren't about destroying the old system, but about transforming it into something better. Speaking of transformation, Edwards gestured toward Joseph, who was deep in discussion with a group of young innovators. "That might be your most impressive achievement." "He changed because he chose to," I replied. "All I did was create an environment where change was possible." As the last guests departed, I returned to my office to gather my things. On my desk lay a small envelope, inside, a handwritten note from Joseph. "Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. You didn't just prove me wrong, you made me better. J." Standing at my window watching the city lights twinkle against the dark sky, I realized that the true victory wasn't in the revenge I'd planned, or even in the success we'd achieved. It was in the transformative power of rising above our worst experiences to create something meaningful. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Saw Blackwood's numbers in the news. Remember when you thought your career was over? Look at you now, sweetheart." I smiled, thinking of that devastating day 3 years ago. Joseph's words, "You'll never be successful without me," had lost their sting entirely. They'd become merely the opening lines of a much greater story. One not of revenge but of redemption, growth, and the kind of success that can only come from lifting others as you climb. The office lights dimmed automatically, signaling the end of another day at the new Blackwood Industries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I savored the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be and then helping others do the same. My husband's family made me walk behind them at the funeral like a servant. "Know your place," his mother hissed. Mourners stared in shock. I followed silently, clutching the envelope the deceased had given me. The will reading was going to be interesting. The hearse pulled away from the church parking lot, leaving behind a sea of black-clad mourners. And that's when Samantha struck. "You walk behind us," she hissed, her manicured fingers adjusting her designer hat with theatrical precision. "You're not real family." 23 years. 23 years of marriage to her son Justin, and this is how she chose to honor Andrew's memory, by putting me in my place at his own funeral. The words hit me like a physical blow, but what hurt more was the silence that followed. Justin stood there, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, staring at the ground as if the asphalt held the secrets to the universe. His brother Mark shuffled his feet, suddenly fascinated by his phone screen. Danielle, his sister, actually smirked, a cruel twist of her lips that she tried to hide behind her black lace handkerchief. "Did you hear me?" Samantha's voice cut through the November air like shattered glass. "Behind us. That's where you belong." Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories about finding your strength when others try to diminish you. If you believe that every woman deserves respect and dignity, regardless of her background or bank account, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to know they're not alone in these struggles. Now let's see how Andrew's final gift changes everything. The funeral procession was forming, and families were lining up according to some invisible hierarchy that apparently placed me at the very bottom. I watched as cousins I'd hosted for Thanksgiving dinners positioned themselves ahead of me. Neighbors who barely knew Andrew's middle name took their places in front of the woman who'd spent the last 3 months bringing him homemade soup and listening to his stories about the Korean War. My purse felt heavy against my side, not from its contents, but from the weight of the envelope tucked carefully inside. Andrew had pressed it into my hands just 7 days ago, his fingers trembling from the medication but his eyes sharp and knowing. "Don't open this unless they betray you," he'd whispered, and somehow, even in his weakened state, he'd known this moment would come. "Nicole." Justin's voice was barely above a whisper. Just do what she says. Please. It's Dad's funeral." That's when something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a lake in early spring. Still holding but showing the fractures that would eventually split it wide open. He was asking me to submit, to accept humiliation, to dishonor his father's memory by dishonoring the woman Andrew had grown to love like a daughter. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I understand perfectly." But I didn't move. Not yet. I stood there, letting the moment crystallize, letting every person within earshot witness what the Morrison family was really made of. Mrs. Henderson from our church, the same woman who'd praised my casserole at the potluck just last month, caught my eye and shook her head in disgust. Even strangers were staring now, their faces twisted with confusion and embarrassment on my behalf. The envelope seemed to pulse against my hip like a living thing. Andrew's final gift, his insurance policy against exactly this kind of cruelty. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait," he told me during one of our quiet conversations in his room, when the rest of the family was downstairs arguing about medical bills and inheritance taxes. "Patience isn't weakness, Nicole. It's preparation." Samantha tapped her foot impatiently, her funeral director's rehearsed sympathy mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. She planned this. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of grief-fueled poor judgment. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to remind me of my place in the family pecking order. "The cars are waiting," Mark announced, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. He'd borrowed $15,000 from me last year to cover his gambling debts, money I'd lent him without question because that's what family does. Apparently, family loyalty only flowed one direction in the Morrison household. I finally moved, taking my position behind them like some sort of domestic help following her employers to an event she wasn't really invited to attend. The whispers started immediately. A low buzz of confusion and disapproval that followed us toward the waiting cars. I could feel eyes on me, could sense the awkward discomfort of people trying to process what they were witnessing. "She's walked behind them before," I heard someone murmur and realized with a jolt that this pattern was visible to others. How many family photos had I been relegated to the back row? How many holiday gatherings had I been assigned to the kitchen while they held court in the living room? How many times had I accepted the role of servant in my own marriage? The funeral home's black Cadillac gleamed in the afternoon sun, its chrome bumper reflecting my face in fragments. I looked older than my 52 years, worn down by decades of small battles and quiet surrenders. My simple black dress, purchased from a department store, not a boutique, felt shabby next to Samantha's designer grief ensemble. Even my grief was apparently inadequate by Morrison family standards. As we reached the cars, Danielle turned back with false concern painted across her features. "Oh, Nicole, there might not be room in the family car. You understand, right? Close relatives only." The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual delivery. Close relatives only, at the funeral of the man who'd become more of a father to me than my own had ever been. The man who'd held my hand when I miscarried our second child, who'd driven 3 hours to my mother's funeral when Justin was too busy with work, who defended me when his family made their cutting remarks about my background. "I'll ride with the Hendersons," I said, my voice carrying farther than I'd intended. "They offered earlier." Mrs. Henderson immediately stepped forward, her arm linking through mine with surprising strength. "Of course, dear. You're family to us." The word family hung in the air like an indictment. Real family doesn't make each other walk behind them. Real family doesn't abandon each other in moments of grief. Real family doesn't weaponize funerals to settle old scores. As the procession began to move, I found myself in the third car, watching the Morrison family through the rear window of their lead vehicle. They sat in their appointed positions, heads held high, playing their parts in some twisted theater where grief came second to power dynamics and love was rationed according to bloodlines and bank accounts. The envelope pressed against my side with each turn, each bump in the road. Andrew's voice echoed in my memory. "They'll show you who they really are, Nicole. And when they do, you'll know what to do." I was beginning to understand that walking behind them wasn't my humiliation. It was my liberation. From this position I could see everything they couldn't. The full scope of their cruelty, the complete picture of their dysfunction, the total absence of the values Andrew had tried so hard to instill in them. The cemetery gates came into view, and with them, the next phase of what Andrew had clearly anticipated would be my awakening. I wasn't walking behind them anymore. I was following them, straight into the trap he'd so carefully prepared. The family home felt different as we stepped through the front door. The same mahogany panels, the same crystal chandelier casting fractured light across the foyer, but something fundamental had shifted. Andrew's presence lingered in every corner. His reading glasses still folded on the side table, his favorite coffee mug unwashed in the kitchen sink, his slippers positioned perfectly beside his recliner as if he might return at any moment. "Everyone in the den," Samantha announced, her authoritative tone cutting through the post-funeral silence. She'd shed her grieving widow performance the moment we'd crossed the threshold, transforming back into the family matriarch who ruled through intimidation and emotional manipulation. The den had always been the seat of Morrison power. Dark leather furniture arranged in a perfect semicircle, Andrew's massive oak desk commanding the room like a throne. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Morrisons staring down with expressions of entitled superiority. I'd sat in this room exactly twice in 23 years, both times relegated to the uncomfortable wooden chair tucked in the corner like an afterthought. Today was no different. "Nicole, you can stand over there." Danielle gestured toward the wall with casual dismissal as if directing hired help to their station. The others settled into their assigned seats, Justin beside his mother on the main sofa, Mark in Andrew's favorite wingback chair, Danielle curled into the love seat she'd claimed as her own since childhood. I remained standing, my back against the bookshelf filled with Andrew's beloved first editions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Surrounded by stories of underdogs and unlikely heroes while being treated like an unwelcome guest in what had supposedly been my family home for over 2 decades. The lawyer arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, his nervous energy immediately filling the room. Harold Brennan had been the family attorney for 15 years, handling everything from business contracts to divorce proceedings for various Morrison relatives. He fumbled with his briefcase, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone, especially me. "Shall we begin?" His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat twice before opening the folder containing what they all believed was Andrew's last will and testament. Samantha leaned forward eagerly, her fingers drumming against the sofa arm in barely contained anticipation. Mark straightened his tie, already mentally calculating his windfall. Danielle practically bounced in her seat, her phone ready to photograph whatever beach house deed she expected to receive. "The last will and testament of Andrew Morrison," Harold began, his voice gaining strength as he fell into the familiar rhythm of legal language. "Being of sound mind and body, I hereby distribute my earthly possessions as follows. Each bequest landed like a perfectly aimed arrow. Mark would inherit 40% of Morrison Construction, along with the commercial properties downtown. Danielle received the beach house in Charleston, the same property where I'd helped plan 3 family reunions, painted the guest bedrooms myself, and planted the garden that had become her Instagram backdrop. Justin inherited the investment portfolio, the remaining 60% of the business and the family home. Me. Nothing. Not even a mention. 23 years of marriage, and Andrew had apparently forgotten I existed when dividing his life's work among his heirs. That concludes the reading, Harold announced, snapping the folder shut with finality that echoed through the room like a judge's gavel. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the celebration began. Oh my goodness! Danielle actually clapped her hands together, her grief forgotten in the rush of acquisition. The beach house. I can finally renovate the kitchen the way I've always wanted. Mark was already pulling out his phone, probably calculating property values and rental income. Justin sat frozen, staring at his hands folded in his lap, but I caught the slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Samantha turned to me with theatrical sympathy. I'm sure you understand, dear. Andrew wanted to keep everything in the family bloodline. You can live in the guest house if you need time to adjust. The guest house. A converted garage with 1 bedroom and a kitchenette that barely qualified as livable space. After 2 decades of hosting their holidays, managing their social calendars and caring for Andrew through his illness, they were offering me charity housing on property that was supposedly no longer mine. That's what happens when you marry up, Danielle whispered to Mark, loud enough for everyone to hear. Eventually reality catches up. Marry up. As if my state university education and teaching career made me fundamentally inferior to their inherited wealth and social connections. As if love could be measured in stock portfolios and property deeds. Harold was packing his briefcase with unusual haste, clearly uncomfortable with the family dynamics playing out before him. His hands shook slightly as he organized his papers, and he kept glancing toward the door as if planning his escape route. That's when I finally spoke. That wasn't Andrew's will. My voice cut through their premature celebration like a blade through silk. That was yours. The room went silent. Not the comfortable quiet of satisfied heirs, but the electric stillness that precedes a thunderstorm. For faces turned toward me with identical expressions of confusion and growing alarm. I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope Andrew had pressed into my hands 7 days earlier. The paper felt warm against my fingers as if it had been absorbing my body heat, waiting for this exact moment. Harold, I believe you need to read this first. My voice remained steady, controlled. 23 years of swallowing insults and accepting dismissal had taught me to mask my emotions perfectly. But inside, something was awakening, a fierce satisfaction that I'd never experienced before. Harold accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. His face went pale as he examined the exterior notarization, the official seals, the date stamp that was clearly more recent than the document he'd just finished reading. This appears to be another will, he stammered, his professional composure cracking completely. Andrew's real will, I corrected gently. The one he actually signed. Read it. Justin found his voice first. Nicole, what is this? Some kind of joke. But Harold was already opening the envelope, his eyes scanning the contents rapidly. His face went from pale to ashen as he read, his hands now shaking visibly. This is highly irregular, he managed. This document appears to be legitimate, and it's dated 3 weeks ago. It supersedes the previous will entirely. Read it, Samantha demanded, her voice sharp with growing panic. Harold cleared his throat, his professional training warring with obvious personal discomfort. The last will and testament of Andrew Morrison, dated. He paused, glancing at the fraudulent document still lying on the coffee table. This is dated after the will I just read. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. According to this document, Harold continued, his voice barely above a whisper, Andrew Morrison leaves his entire estate to his daughter-in-law, Nicole Morrison, with the following note. If this document is not read first, my family has committed fraud. Hold them accountable. The words hit the room like a physical force. Danielle gasped. Mark's phone clattered to the floor. Justin stared at me as if seeing me for the first time in our entire marriage. But it was Samantha's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. No shock. No confusion. Just cold, calculating fury. The expression of someone whose carefully laid plans had just been exposed. Andrew had known. He'd known exactly what they would try to do, and he'd prepared accordingly. The game had just begun. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Samantha's mouth opened and closed twice before she managed to form words, her usual commanding presence dissolving into something brittle and desperate. "That's fake," she declared, but her voice lacked conviction. The woman who had terrorized family gatherings for decades now sounded like a child caught in an obvious lie. He was confused toward the end. The medication made him paranoid. But even as she spoke, I could see the cracks forming in her facade. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she reached for her water glass, and the calculated composure that had been her weapon for so long was crumbling in real time. "So is your smile," I replied, reaching into my purse once more. The second envelope emerged slowly, deliberately. Inside was a small flash drive. Nothing dramatic, just a simple piece of technology that contained the power to destroy everything they thought they knew about their carefully constructed world. Mark shifted uncomfortably in Andrew's chair, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. "Nicole, what are you doing? This is insane." "Is it?" I held the flash drive between my thumb and forefinger, letting the afternoon light catch its metallic surface. Andrew always said the truth has a way of revealing itself. He just needed to make sure it had the right platform. Danielle had stopped pacing and was now pressed against the far wall, her earlier excitement about the beach house completely forgotten. "You're scaring me," she whispered, though whether she was addressing me or the situation in general wasn't clear. Harold's laptop sat open on the coffee table, its screen casting a blue glow across the darkening room. His hands shook as he accepted the flash drive, and I noticed sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. "I don't think this is appropriate," he stammered. "Perhaps we should schedule another meeting when everyone has had time to process." "Play it," I interrupted gently. Andrew specifically requested that if his original will wasn't honored, this recording should be viewed immediately. It's all part of his final wishes. The lawyer's face went through several color changes as he processed the implications. His career, his reputation, possibly his freedom, everything hung in the balance of whatever was contained on that tiny device. Justin finally found his voice. "Nicole, please. Whatever this is, we can work it out as a family. Dad wouldn't have wanted." "Your father wanted exactly this," I said, my voice cutting through his desperate plea. "He spent his final months documenting everything. Every conversation, every scheme, every casual cruelty you all thought went unnoticed." The flash drive clicked into the USB port with a sound that seemed to echo through the room like a judge's gavel. Harold's fingers hesitated over the touchpad, but the legal implications of refusing to follow a deceased client's explicit instructions ultimately overrode his personal discomfort. The video began with Andrew sitting in his favorite chair, the same wingback that Mark now occupied. But this version of Andrew looked different from the frail man who had passed away just days earlier. His eyes were sharp, focused, filled with purpose and a strange kind of peace. "If you're seeing this," Andrew's voice filled the room with startling clarity, "they've already tried to erase Nicole. They're also responsible for more than just forgery." The words hit like physical blows. Samantha's water glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The sound made everyone jump except me. I'd been prepared for this moment since Andrew first showed me the recording 3 weeks ago. "More than just forgery?" Justin's voice cracked like a teenager's. "What does that mean?" But Andrew wasn't finished. The camera angle shifted and suddenly we were watching a different scene entirely. Hidden camera footage from this very room, timestamped 2 weeks before Andrew's death. The quality was grainy but the audio was crystal clear. Samantha's voice, low and conspiratorial. "The doctor said his bones are brittle now. One fall down those stairs." Mark's response was immediate. "Mom, we can't talk about this here." "He never uses the handrail anymore," Samantha continued, ignoring her son's warning. "All those medications make him dizzy. Accidents happen all the time to elderly people." Harold appeared in the frame, his nervous energy even more pronounced in the recording. "We need to be very careful about timing. If the will changes are too recent, it could raise questions." Then we make sure there aren't any questions, Mark said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. Dad's already talking about changing everything. Leaving it all to Nicole because she's the only one who truly cares about him. The bitterness in his voice was toxic. She's manipulated him completely, Danielle's voice added from off-camera. Playing the devoted daughter-in-law while turning him against his real family. The current version of Danielle let out a strangled sob as she watched her recorded self casually discuss their father's potential accident. Mark had gone completely pale, his hands gripping the chair arms so tightly his knuckles were white. But it was Justin's reaction that cut deepest. He stared at the screen in horror, finally seeing his family for what they truly were. "You knew," he whispered to his mother. "You all knew and you let me believe." "Let you believe what?" I asked softly. "That your father's fall was an accident? That finding him at the bottom of the stairs was just bad luck? That the timing of his death, just days before he planned to meet with his own lawyer, was coincidental?" The video continued, showing more conversations, more planning, more casual discussions of Andrew's mortality as if it were a business problem to be solved. Harold's face had gone ashen as he watched his recorded self coordinate the legal aspects of their scheme. "This could destroy my practice," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It should," I replied without sympathy. "Andrew trusted you to protect his interests, and instead you helped them plan his financial elimination. And possibly worse." Samantha finally found her voice again, but it came out as a harsh whisper. We didn't." "Didn't what?" I asked. "Didn't push him down the stairs? Or didn't think he would actually fall when you removed the safety rails he'd asked Mark to install? When you forgot to refill his medication that helps with balance? When you encouraged him to use the stairs instead of the elevator you'd convinced him he didn't need?" The room felt smaller with each revelation. The family portraits on the walls seemed to be watching, judging, bearing witness to the complete destruction of the Morrison legacy. "He documented everything," I continued, letting the silence build between each word. "Every small cruelty, every calculated risk you put him in, every conversation you thought was private. Andrew may have been old, but he wasn't foolish. He knew exactly what you were capable of." Justin stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "I didn't know," he said desperately. "I swear to you, Nicole, I didn't know they were planning any of this. But the damage was done. Whether he had actively participated or simply chosen to remain willfully blind, the result was the same. His father was dead, and his family had orchestrated every aspect of that death, from the financial arrangements to the physical circumstances that made it possible." The video finally ended, leaving us in a silence so complete that the ticking of Andrew's antique clock sounded like thunder. For people who had entered this room as grieving family members now sat exposed as conspirators in an elderly man's death. And I was no longer the woman they had forced to walk behind them at the funeral. I was the woman who held all the evidence. The aftermath of the video left the room in a state of suspended chaos. Samantha was the first to recover, her survival instincts kicking in with the desperation of someone watching their entire world crumble. "That will is fake," she declared, her voice rising with manufactured indignation. "Andrew was completely out of his mind those last few months. Anyone could have coerced him into signing anything." Mark nodded frantically, grasping at the lifeline his mother had thrown. "The medication made him paranoid. He was seeing conspiracies everywhere. You took advantage of a sick old man." "We can contest this," Danielle added, her voice shrill with panic. "No court will honor a document signed by someone in his condition." I listened to their desperate protestations while walking slowly to Andrew's wingback chair. The same chair where he'd shared his plans with me during those quiet evening conversations they'd never bothered to interrupt. The leather still held the faint scent of his cologne, and as I settled into its familiar embrace, I felt his presence surrounding me like armor. "You're all absolutely right," I said calmly, reaching for the glass of water Harold had poured earlier. "Andrew was definitely not in his right mind those last few months." Their faces brightened with premature hope, thinking I was about to validate their claims. "He was angry," I continued, taking a small sip. "Hurt. Disappointed in the family he'd worked his entire life to build. But his mind, sharp as ever." Harold shuffled through his papers with increasing agitation. "Mrs. Morrison, these are very serious allegations. If there's any question about your father-in-law's mental capacity when he signed this document. There isn't, I interrupted gently. Because the will you're also concerned about? It's completely irrelevant. The confusion on their faces was almost comical. Justin leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What do you mean irrelevant? I reached into my purse and withdrew a thick manila folder, placing it on the coffee table with deliberate care. I mean that Andrew transferred all the major assets to me years ago. The house, the investments, the company shares. Everything you just heard Harold read out. None of it belonged to Andrew at the time of his death. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror as the implications sank in. That's impossible, Samantha whispered. We would have known. There would have been paperwork, legal documents. There were, I said, opening the folder to reveal neat stacks of bank statements, transfer documents, and legal filings. Lots of them. All properly filed, all completely legitimate, all dating back several years. Harold reached for the folder with trembling hands, his professional training warring with personal dread. As he examined the documents, his face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly gray. These appear to be authentic, he managed. The transfers are dated, going back 5 years. 5 years, I repeated, letting the words sink in. Andrew started moving assets into my name the same week Samantha told him I was just a gold digger who married up. I pulled out a specific document showing them the date. This house transfer, completed the day after Mark borrowed $50,000 for his gambling debts and never said thank you. Danielle sank into the love seat, her face pale. But nobody told us. Nobody told you because nobody needed to tell you, I explained. You assumed Andrew would always be there to bail you out, fund your lifestyles, and clean up your messes. He let you assume that while quietly ensuring you could never hurt him, or me financially. Justin stood abruptly, knocking over a side table in his agitation. You manipulated him. You isolated him from his family and turned him against us. The accusation hung in the air like poison. After 23 years of marriage, after all the evidence of his family's cruelty, Justin was still ready to blame me rather than face the truth about the people he'd defended for so long. Did I asked, my voice deadly calm. Let me show you something. I reached for another section of the folder, withdrawing a chronological list that Andrew had helped me prepare months earlier. Every asset transfer is dated to correspond with a specific incident. Shall we review them together? I slid the list across to Justin, watching his face as he read. January 15, 2020. The day you started your affair with Rebecca. Andrew transferred the first block of company shares to my name that afternoon. Justin's face went white. How did he? March 3, 2021. The day Samantha told Andrew I was an embarrassment to the family name at the charity gala. He moved the investment portfolio the next morning. Samantha's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Should I continue? I asked. Because there are dozens of entries here. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every time you made it clear I wasn't really family. Andrew documented it all and responded accordingly. Mark grabbed the list, scanning it frantically. His name appeared repeatedly. Unpaid loans, broken promises, casual insults directed at me that he'd thought went unnoticed. June 12, 2022, I read aloud. The day Mark called me the help in front of the Patterson family at the country club. Andrew transferred the beach house deed that evening. I was joking, Mark protested weakly. Were you? I stood up, moving to Andrew's desk where another folder waited. Because Andrew kept a journal too. Would you like to hear what he wrote about that particular joke? The room felt smaller with each revelation. These people who had spent decades treating me like an outsider, who had forced me to walk behind them at Andrew's funeral, were discovering that their victim had been protected all along. The will Harold read today? I continued, returning to Andrew's chair. That was a test. A final opportunity for you to show even a shred of decency, to honor the man who had given you everything. You failed spectacularly. Harold was frantically examining transfer documents, his professional reputation crumbling with each authentic signature and notarization he verified. This is all legitimate, he muttered. Every document is properly executed and filed. So when you tried to steal my inheritance, I said, letting the words hang in the air. You were actually stealing nothing. The house you're sitting in? Mine for 3 years. The company shares you were counting on? Mine for 4 years. The investments? Mine for 2 years. The beautiful irony was not lost on any of us. They had committed fraud, conspiracy, and possibly worse, all to steal assets that no longer existed in Andrew's name. You stole nothing, I told them, my voice carrying the weight of years of suppressed anger and newfound power, because by the time Andrew passed, you were already left with air. Justin slumped back into his chair, the full scope of his family's downfall finally hitting him. But the business, our whole lives. Your whole lives were built on Andrew's generosity, I corrected. Generosity you mistook for weakness, kindness you repaid with cruelty. He spent 5 years quietly protecting himself and me from exactly this scenario. The Morrison family empire, built over generations, sustained by Andrew's hard work and business acumen, had vanished not through death or disaster, but through their own greed and blindness. They had destroyed themselves. The weight of their collective downfall hung heavy in the air when I slowly rose from Andrew's chair, smoothing my black dress with deliberate calm. 4 pairs of eyes tracked my movement, each face painted with a different shade of desperation. I made one call this morning, I announced, my voice cutting through their stunned silence. They'll be here any second. The reaction was immediate and beautiful in its chaos. Harold's briefcase tumbled from his lap, spilling papers across the Persian rug. Mark's face flushed crimson, his hands instinctively moving to loosen his tie as if he couldn't breathe. Danielle let out a sharp gasp that bordered on a shriek, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching at her throat. But it was Samantha's response that surprised me most. The woman who had commanded this household for decades simply closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. You called them before you even got here, Justin said, his voice hollow with realization. You knew exactly how this would play out. While you were all getting dressed for the reading, assuming you'd walk away wealthy and vindicated, I was on the phone with Detective Morrison, no relation, I said with a slight smile, explaining that I had evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and possibly something much worse. The doorbell's sharp chime cut through the tension like a blade. For a moment nobody moved. Then Mark shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'm not going to prison for this, he declared wildly. This is all Mom's idea. Sit down, Samantha commanded, her voice regaining some of its old authority. And keep your mouth shut. But the damage was already spreading. Harold was frantically stuffing documents into his briefcase, his hands shaking so violently that papers scattered like autumn leaves. I need to call my attorney, he muttered. This consultation is over. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. I'll get it, I said pleasantly, as if welcoming guests for afternoon tea. The 2 officers at the door were exactly what I'd hoped for. Professional, serious, and clearly prepared for a complex situation. Detective Morrison, a stern woman in her 40s, introduced herself and her partner while I led them into the den where 4 people sat frozen in various poses of guilt and terror. Mrs. Morrison? Detective Morrison asked, though she was looking directly at me. That's me, I confirmed. Thank you for coming so quickly. As the officer stepped fully into the room, I moved to the coffee table where 3 sealed envelopes waited. I'd prepared them that morning while the family was getting ready for what they'd assumed would be their moment of triumph. Before we discuss the fraud and conspiracy charges, I said, placing my hand on the envelopes, I have some personal items to return. The theater of it was deliberate. After decades of their carefully orchestrated humiliations, I allowed myself this one moment of dramatic justice. I picked up the first envelope, labeled Samantha, in my careful handwriting. This belongs to you, I said, sliding it across the table to my former mother-in-law. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a cheap costume jewelry necklace that sparkled with fake diamonds. The sticky note attached bore her own words. Didn't suit you anyway. You stole this from my jewelry box 3 years ago, I explained to the officers, who were watching with professional interest. During Thanksgiving dinner. You claimed it was too fancy for someone like me, then walked out wearing it. Samantha's face cycled through shame, rage, and humiliation. It was just a trinket, she whispered. Petty theft is still theft, Detective Morrison noted, making a note in her pad. The second envelope went to Mark, who stared at it as if it might explode. "Open it," I encouraged. Inside was a document that looked official at first glance, until closer inspection revealed it was a template I'd downloaded and modified. "Debt forgiveness letter void," was stamped across the top in red ink. "Mark owes me $537,000, I announced calmly. "Various loans over the years that Andrew co-signed. Since I'm now Andrew's heir, those debts transfer to me." I smiled sweetly. "This version is void. I expect full repayment within 30 days. Mark's face went from red to white to green in rapid succession. "I don't have that kind of money," he choked out. "Then you'll need to sell some assets," I replied. "I hear the job market is competitive for people with fraud convictions, so you might want to get started quickly." The third envelope was for Danielle, who had pressed herself so far back into the love seat that she appeared to be trying to merge with the furniture. "This one's my favorite," I said, extending the envelope toward her. She didn't move to take it, so I opened it myself and pulled out a stack of printed emails. The headers were clearly visible. Romantic exchanges between Danielle Morrison and Harold Brennan, time-stamped over the past 6 months. Apparently Harold wasn't just helping with legal matters, I announced to the room. He was also helping with personal ones. Harold made a sound somewhere between a groan and a whimper. His career wasn't just over. It was about to become a public scandal that would follow him for the rest of his life. Danielle began crying in earnest now, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. "How did you get those?" she managed between gasps. "Andrew had security cameras throughout the house," I explained, "including in Harold's office upstairs, where you two thought you were having private conversations about altering the will." I paused, letting that sink in. Among other activities, Detective Morrison was writing rapidly now, her professional demeanor sharpening with each revelation. "Mrs. Morrison, you mentioned fraud and conspiracy charges?" "All documented," I confirmed, gesturing toward Harold's abandoned briefcase. "The will they tried to present today is completely fabricated. They've been planning this for months, as you'll see in the video evidence and recorded conversations." The officers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that this was going to be a much bigger case than they'd initially anticipated. "Harold Brennan," Detective Morrison announced formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud." The transformation was immediate and total. Harold's face crumpled as the handcuffs clicked into place, his professional dignity dissolving completely. "I never meant for it to go this far," he pleaded, looking desperately around the room for sympathy he would never find. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer continued, but Harold was already talking, his words spilling out in a desperate rush of confession and blame-shifting. As they led him toward the door, he turned back one last time. "Samantha, tell them it was your idea. Tell them I was just following instructions." But Samantha had found her steel again. She sat perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap, and said nothing at all. The door closed behind Harold with a finality that seemed to echo through the house. The man who had held their family's legal affairs in his hands for 15 years was gone, leaving behind nothing but scandal and the wreckage of multiple destroyed lives. "Who's next?" Detective Morrison asked, turning back to the remaining family members. The domino effect had begun. The aftermath of Harold's arrest left a vacuum in the room that seemed to suck all the air from the space. Detective Morrison was coordinating with her partner about evidence collection while the remaining family members sat in various states of shock and disbelief. That's when Justin finally found his voice. "Nicole." The word came out cracked, desperate. He stood slowly, his hands extended toward me like a man reaching for a lifeline. "We can fix this. All of this. I know things got out of hand, but we're still married. We're still family." The irony was so thick I could taste it. After 23 years of watching him choose his blood family over me every single time, he was finally ready to choose me, when I was the only one left with anything to offer. "Fix this," I repeated, my voice carrying a dangerous calm that made him take a step back. "You want to fix humiliating me at your father's funeral? Fix watching your family plot against the man who raised you? Fix standing silent while they treated me like hired help for over 2 decades. His face cycled through several expressions, guilt, fear, calculation, before settling on something that might have been genuine remorse if I hadn't known him so well. I didn't know about the will, he pleaded. I swear to you I had no idea they were planning to change it. If I had known. You would have what? I interrupted, standing to face him directly. Stopped them? Defended me? Chosen your wife over your precious family for once in your pathetic life. The words hit him like physical blows. Behind him, Samantha made a small sound of protest, but even she seemed to understand that her influence over her son had evaporated along with the family fortune. You stood there, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, and watched them make me walk behind you at Andrew's funeral. Like a servant. Like someone who didn't belong. You promised me that morning that things would be different, and the first test of that promise, you failed spectacularly. Detective Morrison looked up from her notes, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding before her, but professional enough to let it play out while she documented everything. Justin's shoulders sagged as the full weight of his failures crashed over him. I was trying to keep the peace. Dad had just died and everyone was emotional. Everyone was emotional? My laugh came out sharp and bitter. Your father was dead, Justin. Dead. And your family's first instinct was to put me in my place. To remind me that despite 23 years of marriage, despite caring for Andrew when none of you could be bothered, I was still just an outsider who'd married up. I reached into my purse one final time, withdrawing an envelope that had been waiting for this exact moment. Unlike the others, this one was thick, official, bearing the letterhead of the city's most prestigious divorce attorney. Now you'll follow me, I said, sliding the papers across to him. Into court. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope, his face going white as he scanned the contents. Divorce papers? But when did you? These are dated last week. While you were planning your inheritance windfall, I was planning my freedom, I replied. Everything's already filed. You just need to sign where indicated. The transformation in the room's dynamics was swift and complete. Samantha, who had spent decades orchestrating family decisions from her position of power, now sat diminished and silent. Mark stared at his shoes, probably calculating how he was going to explain a $500,000 debt to his wife. Danielle continued crying softly, her social status crumbling as thoroughly as her family's finances. Detective Morrison cleared her throat. Mrs. Morrison, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. We have enough here to begin proceedings against the remaining family members for conspiracy to commit fraud. Of course, I said graciously. I'll bring all of Andrew's documentation. He was very thorough in his record-keeping. As the officers prepared to leave, I walked slowly to the head of the dining table, the same table where I'd been relegated to serving duties for every family gathering, the same table where I'd been told countless times that there wasn't room for my opinions in family discussions. I pulled out Andrew's chair and sat down. The symbolism was lost on no one. This chair had been Andrew's throne, the seat of family power for over 40 years. Samantha had never been allowed to sit in it, even after her husband's death. It represented authority, legacy, control, everything they had assumed would pass to Justin as the eldest son. Now it was mine. What are you doing? Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Taking my place, I replied simply. The place Andrew always intended for me to have. From this position I could see the entire room differently. The family portraits that had seemed so intimidating when I was standing against the wall now looked down at me with what felt like approval. Andrew's spirit seemed to settle around my shoulders like a comfortable shawl. You can't just, Mark started to protest, but his words died when he met my eyes. I can, I said with quiet authority. This is my house now. My table. My family legacy to protect or destroy as I see fit. The police finished their preliminary work and prepared to leave, but Detective Morrison paused at the door. We'll be in touch about the investigation. Given the complexity of the case and the video evidence, I expect there will be additional charges. After they left, the silence in the room was profound. For people who had entered this house that morning as members of a powerful, wealthy family now sat as criminal defendants facing financial ruin and social disgrace. I was never behind you, I said finally, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly spacious room. I was just waiting for the right moment to pass you all. Justin looked up from the divorce papers, his face etched with something that might have been understanding. He planned all of this, didn't he? That this was his design from the beginning. Andrew taught me that patience could be its own form of power, I confirmed. He showed me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait, watch, and let people reveal exactly who they are. Samantha stood abruptly, her designer composure finally cracking completely. This isn't over, she declared, but her voice lacked any real conviction. Yes, I said calmly, it is. As the sun began to set through the den windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug, I remained in Andrew's chair. My chair now, watching the family that had tried to erase me slowly dissolve into individual fragments of their former selves. The woman they had forced to walk behind them at the funeral was gone. In her place sat the new matriarch of a dynasty they would never be part of again. If this story of ultimate justice had you cheering for Nicole, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she calmly took Andrew's chair at the head of the table, claiming her rightful place as the new matriarch. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.